Imagine walking into a store, minding your own business, only to be targeted and humiliated by those who are supposed to protect you. That's exactly what happened to one black female billionaire who, despite her immense success, found herself treated like a criminal simply because of the color of her skin. As she entered the store, everything seemed normal at first, until the police showed up, accusing her of something she didn't do. Shocked by the situation, she calmly tried to explain, but what happened next left both the officers and onlookers stunned. This story is not just about the mistreatment of a wealthy individual, but about the deeper issue of racial profiling, something that impacts people every day. Despite her achievements, this billionaire was not immune to the same injustices that countless others face. The tension was thick as the officers tried to justify their actions, completely unaware of who they were dealing with. The disbelief on their faces when they discovered her identity, priceless. But how did it all unfold, and what happened after the shocking revelation? Stay tuned as we dive deeper into this unexpected encounter and find out how this powerful woman turned the tables, leaving everyone questioning their assumptions. To fully understand the gravity of this situation, we need to step back and look at who this woman is. Known for her brilliance in the business world, she had built an empire from the ground up, becoming one of the few black female billionaires in the world. Her name was synonymous with success, entrepreneurship, and breaking barriers in industries where few had gone before. But none of that seemed to matter the moment she walked into that store. In a matter of seconds, she went from a respected business mogul to just another black person who was being unfairly targeted. As the officers began questioning her, it was clear they were treating her as if she didn't belong there. They asked her to show proof of purchase, though she had done nothing wrong. In the background, a few customers watched with growing concern, unsure of what was unfolding. They didn't know who she was, but the way she was being treated didn't sit right with them. Yet, no one stepped in. It wasn't until the situation escalated that her identity was revealed. The officers, still focused on their assumptions, had no idea who they were dealing with. With her patience wearing thin, she asked one simple question that would change everything. But would the officers believe her? And how would they react when the truth came to light? The tension was about to reach its breaking point. As the officers continued to question her, their tone became more aggressive and their accusations more baseless. One officer demanded to see her receipt again, but this time he raised his voice, drawing unwanted attention from other customers in the store. The other shoppers, unsure of what was going on, shifted uncomfortably, some trying to discreetly record the scene on their phones. But there was an air of hesitation. Many didn't want to get involved, afraid of making the situation worse. What they didn't realize was that they were witnessing something much bigger than a simple misunderstanding. From the officer's perspective, this was just another routine check. They had seen it all before. A store security alarm went off, a potential thief was in their midst, and they were just doing their job. But for the billionaire, this was a harsh reminder of the prejudice that she, like so many others, had to face every day, no matter her status. Her calm demeanor was beginning to slip as she asked the officer, "Do you know who I am?" Her voice, though controlled, carried an undeniable edge of frustration. The officer barely registered the question, dismissing it as arrogance. Meanwhile, a young woman in the crowd, witnessing everything unfold, felt a pang of guilt. She had recognized the billionaire, but she hadn't spoken up. The fear of being caught in the middle held her back, and now she regretted not standing up sooner. The tension was palpable as the billionaire's patience wore thin. She repeated her question, but this time her tone shifted. The officer, sensing a change, hesitated. Would they finally realize their mistake, or would this moment spiral into something much worse? The atmosphere in the store had shifted. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, and the tension between the officers and the billionaire seemed to thicken with every passing second. She stood firm, her eyes locked on the officer, unwilling to back down. Every moment stretched out, like a standoff, with people holding their breath, unsure of what would happen next. The officer, still unsure of how to proceed, took a step back, his hand hovering near his radio. He glanced at his partner, who seemed equally confused. They both exchanged a silent look, unsure of how far to push this situation. Yet, in the midst of their uncertainty, the billionaire spoke again, her voice cutting through the rising tension like a blade. "Check my name," she said, her tone no longer pleading but commanding, as if she had all the time in the world to make them realize their mistake. For a moment, the officers stood still, unsure of how to respond. They had already dug themselves in too deep, and there was no easy way out. Her words echoed in the room, and the crowd watched, some recording, others with their eyes wide open, realizing something was about to unfold that could change everything. The officer finally hesitated, reluctantly pulling out his phone. He typed her name into the system, but even then, it wasn't an immediate revelation. The seconds ticked by, stretching into what felt like an eternity. The woman, knowing her identity was about to shatter their assumptions, watched them closely. What would they do when the truth came crushing down? Would they accept their error, or would they double down? The uncertainty hung heavy in the air, and the crowd waited, breathless, for what would happen next. As the officer typed her name into the system, the store seemed to hold its collective breath. The seconds that passed felt agonizingly long. Just as the tension reached its peak, the officer's phone buzzed, breaking the silence. He glanced down, his brow furrowing, and the faint sound of disbelief was audible in his voice. "Wait a minute," he murmured, his eyes scanning the screen. The other officer leaned in, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But before they could react, the unexpected happened. A voice suddenly rang out from the back of the store, sharp and clear. "Is there a problem here?" It was a manager, hurriedly walking towards the scene, his face already flushed with irritation. He had seen the growing crowd and the rising tension, and he was clearly not pleased. But as he reached the officers and the billionaire, his expression shifted. His gaze flicked between the officers and the woman standing in front of them, a look of confusion clouding his features. "She's the one who's been targeted, seriously." The manager's voice was a mixture of disbelief and anger. He knew exactly who she was. He had seen her before, several times. The woman, the billionaire, was a regular customer in his store, often praised for her generosity and the partnerships she had extended to local businesses. The officers were taken aback, completely unprepared for this twist. The tension now shifted again, but this time, it wasn't just about proving the woman's identity, it was about the power dynamics at play. The manager's intervention didn't just change the mood in the room, it threatened to escalate everything to a new level. Just as the officers were about to speak, the crowd seemed to lean in, sensing that something was about to break. What would they do now? Would they stand their ground, or would the stakes rise even higher? The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, but her calm remained, even as the pressure intensified. The store, once a neutral ground, now felt like a battlefield. The conflict was no longer just about racial profiling. It was about how power, status, and perception could shift in an instant. The tension in the air was palpable as the manager approached, his eyes locked on the officers. The billionaire stood there, still composed but visibly frustrated, while the onlookers waited for the inevitable moment of reckoning. The officer's hand still hovered over his phone, and the growing realization was beginning to dawn on him that he had made a grave mistake. The manager, now standing beside the woman, looked at the officers with a hard, unblinking stare. "You've got her name, right? She's one of our most valued clients. I can't believe this is happening." His voice was firm, and his tone carried weight. The officers, clearly caught off guard, exchanged nervous glances. The billionaire nodded, her voice unwavering as she responded, "I understand, but maybe next time, do your job without assuming." The crowd, once still, now began to murmur with a sense of relief, sensing that justice was about to be served. But then, just as the officer was about to apologize, something unexpected happened. A man stepped forward from the back of the store, holding his phone up. "You're wrong about this whole thing," he said, his voice laced with conviction. The crowd quieted again, watching in confusion. I saw what happened before all of this went down, the man continued, and I can tell you it wasn't just the police making assumptions. This was about the store itself. Everyone turned to look at him. He revealed that he had been watching the interactions from the moment the woman walked in. The security guard was watching her from the moment she entered, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. This wasn't just the officers. It was the store's decision to call them in. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Suddenly, it wasn't just a case of racial profiling by the police. It was about a systemic issue within the store, a company that had failed to protect its loyal customer, one who had supported them for years. The officers stood speechless, and the manager's face turned pale, realizing that the story was bigger than anyone had anticipated. The billionaire took a deep breath, absorbing the gravity of the moment. "You think this is over? It's just starting," she said with quiet authority, her gaze now turning toward the manager, then back to the officers. The room fell silent as the true scale of the injustice began to unravel before everyone's eyes. This wasn't just a random encounter. It was a story of power, race, and the uncomfortable truths that people often try to ignore. And as the crowd began to shift, the woman's next move would determine how far this would go. Would she take action, or would this moment fade away? The stage was set for a new battle, one that no one in that room would ever forget. The room fell silent as the woman's words echoed, her calm authority still holding the floor. The manager stood frozen for a moment, processing the gravity of the situation. He knew that the store's reputation was on the line, and now, with the truth out in the open, he was left with a choice. He could apologize and hope it was enough, or he could ignore the reality of what had happened and risk it all. The billionaire, sensing the shift in power, made her decision clear. She turned to the manager, her eyes unwavering. "I'll be taking this to the media. You've embarrassed yourselves and shown your true colors. I won't stand for it." Her words were deliberate and final, and the crowd felt the weight of her resolve. The officers, now fully aware of their mistake, stepped back, offering half-hearted apologies that did little to ease the tension. The manager, his face flushed with embarrassment, nodded reluctantly, acknowledging the undeniable truth of the situation. It was a moment of reckoning for all involved. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the billionaire walked out of the store, leaving behind a trail of questions and reflections. The system had failed her, but in that moment, she had shown that even in the face of injustice, there was power in standing firm. For everyone watching, it was a reminder that no one is immune to bias, but courage can make a difference. The world was watching, and this wasn't the end, it was only the beginning.